Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar this morning, How to Manage PC Postage and Carrier Service Across Your Enterprise. We will get started at about 2 minutes past the hour. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar, How to Manage PC Postage and Carrier Services Across Your Enterprise. We're going to get started about 2 minutes past the hour. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, How to Manage PC Postage and Carrier Services Across Your Enterprise. We'll get started in about 2 minutes. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us with our webinar, How to Manage PC Postage and Carrier Services Across Your Enterprise. So let's get started with a couple of housekeeping instructions. So there's a meeting instructions in your GoToWebinar meeting link. All lines will be on mute until the end of the meeting to minimize background noise. If you do have a question, you have two ways to ask. You can click the hand to ask a question and we will unmute you, or type your question in the chat box and we will do our best to answer all questions. There are two forms of audio. You can either use your computer audio or your telephone as the preferred method just by dialing in with your access code. Make sure you put in your audio PIN that is shown after joining the webinar, or we will not be able to unmute you and you won't be able to ask your question. To minimize and get rid of the GoToWebinar control panel so it's not in the way of the presentation, just click the little orange arrow to minimize it. This presentation is being recorded today and will be made available upon request, and the link will be sent in the follow-up email after the presentation. You will also be able to find the presentation and the recording on SlideShare and on our website under FAQs. If you have any issues during the meeting, please contact myself, Doris Tam, at 905-330-2156, or email me directly, and I'll be happy to assist. There will be a short survey after the presentation. We do appreciate your feedback. So a little bit about our speaker today, Adam Lewenberg. He is the president of Postal Advocate, the only mail audit and recovery firm in the U.S. and Canada. We manage a portfolio of over 134,000 pieces of mailing and shipping equipment for the largest U.S. companies. He speaks and teaches nationally on mail savings and industry trends. He is the former industry co-chair of the Boston Postal Customer Council, and he also has a membership with the Mail Systems Management Association with certifications in CMDSS and MDC. He's a featured writer for Mailing Systems Technology magazine, and he also worked for one of the largest mailing vendors for over 17 years as the director of national sales for Presort, tabletop inserters, addressing, hardware, software, and green offerings. He was also one of the top 5 account managers nationally, working with some of the nation's top accounts. Postal Advocate is not affiliated with any mailing vendor, so we offer unbiased advice. Over to you, Adam.
Thanks, Doris. I appreciate the introduction. So today we're going to talk about how to basically optimize your carrier and postage expenses through the tools that are available for you and how you can physically drive costs. So what we're going to be covering today is the challenges that companies face managing enterprise PC postage and carrier services. How do you gain the visibility and insight as far as gathering all the data, reporting on all the vendors and carriers, reporting on how do you create those standards and reporting so you can do things with it? What are the key areas of savings to look for and how we can help? So we work with large enterprise organizations that could have anywhere between 20 locations and 3,000 locations. And what we find is these are the things that we're finding in most of our accounts, that they're all dealing with the same things. So they all have multiple locations and workplaces. Some work, out of offices, some work remote, some work out of homes while traveling. There's multiple different technologies they could be using from the different carriers. And mailing equipment vendors, they could be using air bills, they could be using UPS stores, they could be using, carrier provided systems. The data is rarely complete, and they have these fragmented pockets of data. And every year they have to deal with rising costs. So, come January 1st, UPS and FedEx costs will be going up 5%. The post office is going to have a 2 to 5% increase. And although those are the national averages, it could be more based on the specific items that you're mailing and shipping. So with this, we have to figure out ways that we can streamline this. So in the multiple location factor, and this is the #1 thing that we deal with as an organization, how do you manage this when you have people in such fragmented places? So there's fewer offices than it used to be. It used to be that there were footprints of defined offices with lots of people in one location. There's a huge growing trend of people working remote, in satellite locations, sometimes at WeWork spaces or Regis facilities, sometimes they're working in airports. People are everywhere, and that's only going to increase. So how do you enforce rules? How do you, maintain active user list? How do you identify rogue accounts that get set up? So this can get managed. And we found ways that we're going to go over where this can be made simple. Multiple technologies. So we went through this a little bit, but there are now 10 or 15 prime technologies that people will be using to manage the spends. The majority of organizations rely on free carrier-provided tools from UPS and FedEx. UPS Campus Ship is the main system. That's a web-based cloud system. FedEx is through FedEx.com. It can have administrative controls. But then in the same time, they could be using, a non-linked account. They could be using postage meters. They could be using vendor-provided, multi-carrier systems. They could be going to UPS stores. So it could be across the board, and many organizations don't have everything going through a standard path. Our goal is to try to get people through standard processes that can be monitored and tracked over time. Fragmented and incomplete data with limited visibility. So how are managing reports received from the different carriers? Is there sporadic reporting from different vendors, with incomplete information? Are invoices matching the reports? How are they matching all the shipping and mailing spends and tying it back to cost centers and GL codes? There's usually an inability to analyze this data to make sure there's compliance for discounts and things like that. And once there is better visibility to those, it gives you more leverage in negotiating better rates for the future. And the rising cost base. So they keep going up every year. It's not going to change. Costs are going to keep growing up. And we're seeing spends in most areas continuing to rise. So one of the biggest issues is there's two streams of shipments that go through most organizations. So when people think shipping, what we think of is typically the person on the left. We think of a professional shipper of items going through, a central shipping department. And these are professional shippers in theory. They're trained around their shipping process. It's a core part of their job responsibility. They have systems and tools designed to optimize this category. There's a traffic management department that reviews these things. They use primarily ground services for packages unless someone requests expedited delivery. And there's continuing education and improvement because there's that visibility to it. It's at a couple locations where they're doing the bulk of their work, and it's easy to control that with the right people and resources. Now, that's not the majority of what we deal with in our day-to-day basis. That group, has ways around optimizing. There's some areas to improve that. But the majority of the savings and the opportunity that we find in most organizations is from the other group. Let's say you're an insurance company with 100 locations. You don't have a shipping room. Maybe you have a mail center at a corporate office that maybe has some of those things, the professional mail service, but most likely not. Most of your users are casual users who people are sitting in their desktops, either in their home offices and field sites or even at a headquarters. They have no formal training. It's only doing shipments when they need to. They're using free carrier tools or air bills that have limited visibility to help you make better decisions. There's very little oversight and support for them. And they're primarily using overnight services because it's documents, and there's no formal education. And the scariest part is this is the group that makes up most of a client's shipping spends that needs the most support. So the group that needs the most support with the most complex needs has the least and the worst tools to do it and the least education around doing it. And they're the ones spending the money in your organizations. So our goal is to figure out how do we take that reality of these casual users and form it into something where they can make better decisions, where there's more visibility and oversight around them, and so that they can have the same advantages that the professional service shipper has without all the time invested in resources. So the first thing that we do is we work on visibility and insight. Can we consolidate your carriers wherever possible to gain contracting leverage? So some clients we go to say, yeah, we use UPS, FedEx, and DHL. So the question is, why? Like, it benefits you the most when you can have, the majority of your spends with one or two carriers because you can use it as leveraging discounts. Then the next step is to consolidate the billing into one invoices for all of your account numbers and locations within a carrier. So if you use UPS and you have, 200 sites, the goal is to have all those 200 sites feeding through to one bill so it can be managed and processed versus that being fragmented around different account numbers. Sometimes that works. Sometimes you need to split it up by different business units. So at least a specific business unit is getting a bill. What you try to avoid is individual locations or small groups getting individual carrier bills because it becomes much harder to manage and it loses complete visibility. you want to make sure that there's package level detail on every transaction, and so the carriers can back up the spends. If they're sending you an invoice for $100,000, they should be able to provide you the package level detail of every one of the packages that made up that $100,000. Not just what the charge was, what was the breakout? How much were the fees? How much were for fuel surcharges? How much were for residential delivery surcharges? How much was for the specific 2-day end of day service? They should be able to break that down with where it went, and so you have the audits along with cost centers and account numbers to back this up. So again, we want to limit the number of carrier accounts. So we have an account that has 2,500 locations throughout the country. They have 3,500 carrier accounts from one carrier. So because prior to us starting with them, there were no internal controls of how carrier accounts got set up. So people would just kind of set up their own carrier accounts. Now, luckily, the majority were linked to the master account, so they're getting their discounts. But you can imagine how difficult it is to manage these 3,500 accounts, which we're in the process of consolidating down. So it's a good idea to limit the number of carrier accounts. Some companies go the other direction, and they'll have one carrier account, and they'll manage it by cost center and location codes. So that can be done as well. Pull in USPS spends throughout your location. So most organizations have some visibility to their UPS and FedEx, but the postal spends, are all over the place with very little detail to how much they're spending across the organization. And that might not just be through their postage meters. It could be through permit accounts. It could be through stamp buying that's done through petty cash. And then again, work with your vendors on account consolidations. Once you have this data, what can you do with it? What we find is a best practice is to create standardized dashboards and reports that in a specific format that includes some of the core items that you're going to need to manage. So these are cost center chargeback details. Cost centers is a huge issue for organizations. A bill comes in, there aren't the right cost centers on it. It's an inordinate amount of work for organizations to try to track those packages back to the cost centers. This can be managed upfront to make sure that there's a better process for charging this back, so this doesn't have to be so much work, and so things can get effectively charged back. Spend by location and service level. So it's really important to know what locations are spending the most, what are the trends at a location, what service levels are those locations using, so you can make sure that each site is making the best choices. What are some specific areas of focus that you want to dive into? 830 deliveries, pickup fees. We'll go into some more details on those items. And you want to promote what are the top areas where savings can occur so you can create an educational program around those things. So, the core focus of the shipping industry up to this point has always been there are companies that audit your shipping bills and they look for late shipments and improper residential fees and things like that. And then there are some companies that will help you negotiate carrier discounts. And that's great for companies that are, big shippers that fall into that professional shipping organization. Where we focus on is companies that have existing contracts today. How do we optimize what people are spending money on within that contract today to make sure they're driving the highest savings? So what are those core areas where you can create the most savings? And then create education and follow-up on those items, and we'll go into more detail on how that works. This dashboard needs to be updated monthly to find changes in behavior. So if you implement a specific change and you educate people around it, are you getting reductions in your 830 deliveries? So people aren't paying those extra fees. Set benchmarks and segment the data so you can see where the spend is by group and location. Look for overcharges, contract compliant issues. What are the spends for accessorial charges, contract compliance? Is every site getting your corporate discounts? Are there duplicate invoices? Are there late deliveries and residential fees that we talked about? So to make sure that there's a process for managing all of this data and that someone's looking at it on a regular basis with some benchmarks and dashboards that can track it. So who in your organization is managing this data across your different carriers, for things like billing, reporting, visibility, and postage management? And, it might be for multiple carriers. It might be for UPS, FedEx, DHL. Some people use stamps.com or Pitney Bowes for PC postage. You may have postage meters, or you may have multi-carrier, shipping systems that are controlling this data. But we find in most organizations, no one's managing this across their portfolio. It's ad hoc and by different groups. So when there is this sort of central visibility to it and central management, it can drive down savings. Who's managing the day-to-day requests? So like, let's take the most common that we find out there is someone uses UPS Campus Ship or they use FedEx.com. There's an enterprise account. So, and they have maybe their 100 locations on that platform. So someone needs to do things like, reset passwords, answer questions when someone doesn't know how to use the tool, promoting the system, adding new locations, adding new users, password cost enter address changes, ongoing training, simplify supply ordering if they need to order label stock and things like that. And then things like purging inactive accounts. So this is a weird one. If you have UPS or FedEx, UPS Campus Ship or FedEx.com, and you have users in that system that are no longer employed, someone needs to delete those users out of the system because that user can go to a UPS store or, a FedEx Kinko's with that account number, and they can ship product wherever they want because they have your account number. It's like cash. So best-in-class process is to delete those users from the platform, but we find very few organizations have that sort of process in place to delete users, and users will stay in there for long periods of time. What documentation and reporting do you have about requests throughout your location? So just like, who's doing this sort of thing? We find that usually all of these sort of steps are either done by someone in the mail center or someone in procurement. And someone in the mail center typically doesn't have the type of training, is usually responsible for just that one location, and maybe as a favor or as an extra responsibility does it for some of the field sites, but it's not a core part of their job. If it's someone in purchasing, it's usually not, or sourcing, it's usually not a core part of their job either, and they're doing it as a fill-in to try to help make sure that the users are taken care of. But it's not managed like a service. There's not case management. There is not sort of the day-to-day oversight and response times and SLAs that are in place for other areas of the business that you expect responses. And this could be over multiple different systems that people have. It's not uncommon for someone to use UPS Campus Ship, Stamps.com, potentially have different postage meters that they're managing. And we don't find in most organizations that the right level of oversight managing this stuff. We find that by us bringing in professional management, it can streamline this and make it a lot easier and more efficient. Simple things like case management, automatically assigning case numbers to activities, making sure there's follow-up, that if someone needs a password reset, a new account set up, users deleted, that there's a process and a documentation that can be reported on to make sure those things get done. And in some cases, for some of our clients, we've set up web dashboards where they can, through a website, they can, basically create their own tickets and follow up with the items that they need to be tracked. Next, we're going to move into areas of savings. There are a lot of savings that organizations can have inside their carrier contracts without renegotiating rates, without, finding errors in UPS bills and things like that and FedEx bills. It's what can you do to drive savings inside your users? And we're going to go over what we find are some of the bigger ones. These won't be all of them, but these will be some of the key ones. Every organization is going to be a little bit different. The keys are to identify the spends, group it by location, distribute the data of who's making the biggest errors, who could fix those things to key stakeholders. Maybe it's VPs, maybe it's general managers, maybe it's people that can help drive communications and change throughout the organization. Create education around what people need to do to change behaviors to start doing the right things. Report on these changes over time to see, is it making an impact, the work you're doing, and then reinforce the wins. So when people, when offices are doing better behaviors in their systems, that it's reinforced and it's celebrated that they're having these types of savings. You have to remember, this is not the professional shipper that we're talking about. This is the casual user who by no means would consider themselves an expert on making the best shipping decisions, who relies on tools to make the best decisions. So let's go through some of these in detail. So the biggest, well, not the biggest, but maybe in this order of like the most common people think of, converting 8:30 delivery to 10:30 delivery. Now, the prices I'm going to show you are list prices for FedEx and UPS. Everyone on this call gets some sort of discount from UPS and FedEx, which are the two prime carriers, okay? And your discounts are going to vary by account. The core thing is to look at this as a baseline. Most discounts are a percentage off the list price, which these are the list prices. So even if you're getting a 50% discount on these variances are still there. So So let's look at a next day that you're sending 8:30 delivery to zone 4. Zones mean how far is it going away from you. Zone 4 is like an average zone. Going from Boston to, I think a zone 4 would be Florida or Ohio or things like that is probably a zone 4, as an example, halfway across the country. So if we're doing zone 4, a next day 8:30 delivery is $86.51. UPS next day 10:30 is $56.51. It's a $30 extra fee to get it there 2 hours early. You look at FedEx, it's the same $30 fee to get it there. Most organizations also have a different rate table for their 8:30 a.m. early deliveries, they're called, versus their 10:30s, which they may not get the same discount percentage. So in other words, they might get a 50% discount on their next day 10:30, but only a 40% discount on their 8:30 deliveries, making these gaps even bigger. So are there controls that you want to set up either in your shipping systems or in the visibility reporting to who's doing the 8:30 deliveries, who are the biggest culprits? Can only certain levels inside your organization ship 8:30 delivery? And is there the visibility to these user sets? Can there be educational programs that educate people about the additional costs so the people that are using the 8:30 deliveries at least understand the cost impact, which they may or may not be able to see in the tools they're using? Are there web links that could be maintained in the internal intranet where it could discuss this as a best practice? And then reporting to be created to see what changes in that behavior happen over time when you implement this type of education. This is how you drive costs and drive people to make better decisions. Remember, these are uneducated shippers. Bear with me. 1 pound package to letter. So if you send something, if you're in UPS Campus Ship and someone's sending out a 1 pound, sending out a letter pack, but they don't check off the letter pack, they check off it's just 1 pound, or it's a half a pound, it defaults to the UPS 1 pound rate. If it's going in a letter pack, it defaults to the letter rate, and you can see the difference in rate. Something that's going 10:30 delivery is $56.51 versus $37.45, a $19 difference just based on someone checking a different box. In some cases, someone might grab the wrong packaging. Someone might check off, letter pack, just it's the weight versus the letter pack option because they make a mistake because they're not educated users. The cost impact of these things are significant. Most of what people are sending in the office environment are documents that should be going in the letter pack. So with this, we recommend having educational programs on where this makes sense, creating reporting on who are the biggest users of the 1 pound items that aren't going letter pack so that we can validate maybe it is samples, maybe it is something, a box or because of the size it needs to. But this letter pack to 1 pound rate is a significant difference. And if it can be monitored and people can be educated, they'll make better decisions. Converting air to ground. So most people who are sending documents throughout their locations are shipping 90% of their stuff air, which is going to be your next day, 10:30, 2:30, end of day, 2-day, 3-day services. Ground, if you look in the carrier provided systems, is not listed in the same spots. It's not compared. Also, the packaging that you get for the air shipments is included by FedEx and UPS, where ground shipments, you have to provide your own packaging. But look at the differences. So one, there's a difference in cost. That the ground has a significantly lower cost, as you can see from the charts above. But next, in some areas, ground gets the same or faster delivery as the air service, based on what zone it is. So if it's in zone 2, so picture, I'm in New York and it's going to New Jersey or Boston, that's still considered zone 2. So if I sent that item ground, I'm getting the same end of day service that I would if I sent it next day 2:30. But instead of $27, it's $7.85. I get guaranteed 2-day delivery in zone 3 or 4. So maybe if I'm sending a 2-day service for $18.99 going in, in zone 3, it's $8.23 ground. And let's take a zone 4. I'm sending something 3-day at $16.41. It might be $8.96 sending it ground with the same delivery. So in some cases, people are sending things 2- and 3-day service to try to save money, and the ground service could actually get there faster Because if it's local, but someone says, I want to save some money, I'll send it 2-day, the ground might have gotten there a day faster because it's a local delivery. So in order to implement that, the key things to do is you need to provide packaging. You need to develop an envelope that you can use for documents that's firm, that's in a hard pack like you would have an envelope pack. And you can order these at Staples or at different envelope providers that you provide throughout your buildings that you could use for these. So people have an envelope they can use. You need to have educational programs that you can run on where this service makes sense so people can consider it. There'd be links maintained on your intranet that could offer references and best practices. And again, reporting would need to be created to see the changes in behavior. Who are the biggest culprits for these items that could be converted to ground? And then can those people be educated, in a nice way? I mean, the whole goal is not to penalize anyone. The goal is to show people that there could be savings if they change their behaviors and their actions on the tools. Pickup fees. People don't think about pickup fees, but it's that sort of like nasty secret that sits in the background. These are UPS's and FedEx's pickup fees. If you spend less than $75 a week in shipping charges, it's $27 in UPS and $29 for FedEx. If you spend over $75 a week, that gets cut in half to $13.50 and $14.50. Now, you may be so big that you've negotiated these fees down, and maybe you only get charged a lower rate on your greater than 75, but there's typically fees, at least for the less than $75 segment. There are some fees, even if these fees are reduced. Look at the impact of these fees. We've had one of our clients spending over $1.7 million a year on pickup fees. And so if those things can be managed, people can make better decisions. So these fees can vary based on the number of days per week you have pickups and your weekly spend. So you may have some sites that only need pickup twice a week, or 3 times a week. Those can vary, and the spends. These fees, look when you have multiple locations. Someone has 100 locations, could be $100,000 a year, 250 locations, $263,000 a year, just for pickup. For UPS or FedEx to show up at your site every day or at specific times to pick up your package. For the honor of doing business with them, you have to pay these types of fees. So many locations, you could have discounts on these, but I'm telling you, most companies are paying some pickup fees inside their invoices. So the question is, what are other options that they could do? Do you need a carrier to pick up mail at a specific time every single day? Could there be drop-off boxes locally? Could there be an on-call schedule? Could you negotiate something with your carriers that say maybe they have specific tools that they can use where you only pay for what you use, or that can simplify things for them where they can make it worth your while? The point is, this fee needs to be managed with best practice developed throughout your organization. And it needs to be, so you can document exactly what those pickup fees are, who's having the biggest pickup fees, and who's using the lowest volumes but still having these pickup fees to determine if this is the best course of action. The big question you should be asking is, does every location need a daily pickup? And in many areas, the answer is no. But this needs to be managed with the same level of visibility we talked about the other items. And that's where we find our level of sort of detail and reporting and visibility is really helpful, is owning this stuff on a regular basis and monitoring the changes. USPS is a secondary option. So most people will say, I ship UPS, I ship FedEx, I have a carrier provided system, they have a contract with them, that's how we do things. Great. For the majority of things, that probably makes the most sense. But there are exceptions. Here are the areas where the post office is historically going to be lower, regardless of how aggressive your discounts are. Residential lightweight items less than 3 pounds. And the reason this is important is look at these rate structures for a sec. So let's say I send a 1 pound item priority mail and $7.49. And let's say you're comparing that to UPS ground, which is $9. But you say, okay, I ship millions of dollars with UPS, I have a 50% ground discount. Well, okay, so you're spending $4.50 for this package, but UPS typically and FedEx will typically have a minimum threshold that says, the lowest shipment, regardless of your discount, can be $5.50. So let's start there as a baseline. Then they charge a residential surcharge of $3.80. Then if it's one of 23,000 zip codes, whether it's commercial or residential, and these are what they consider more rural zip codes, but still a lot of them, 23,000 of them. They charge $270 to $465 as delivery area surcharges, plus they add $7 for fuel. So that $5.50 package plus a residential fee, now you're at $9.50, plus if there's a delivery area surcharge, maybe you're at another $3, you're at $12, plus fuel, you're at $13, versus the post office, which is at $7.50. And so because of those things, the post office delivers to every residence every day. They can be more effective and cost effective in the residential market, whereas it's their bread and butter. Also, the post office has ounce rates. So they have a first-class parcel service that if you're sending, let's say, an 8-ounce item, it's $3.22 because they go by the ounce, where UPS and FedEx only go by the pound. So this is where the post office, really starts to win, and where it makes sense in some cases to rate shop them against UPS and FedEx and have systems that can do both. So there would need to be educational programs in place and reporting. You could use PC postage programs for locations that could benefit the most. You don't need them at every location, but this is, it's where is this happening in your organization to determine, is the post office viable? Saving tips. So regardless of whether it's PC postage or, it's multi-carrier, it's move to commercial rates. A lot of people will be sending out priority mail, and they'll be doing it through a postage meter, or they go to the post office to send them out. The issue is you're getting retail rates versus commercial rates. So even if you just run it through your postage meter and you commit this meter imprint, you're getting these retail rates. The difference between the retail and the commercial rates on average is 18% for priority mail, 13% for express. So the reason is the post office wants you to submit a 4x6 label, submit the transaction electronically through a tool so they can track it like UPS and FedEx tracks. And because of that, they're willing to give discounts. So there are ways to create the visibility of where this is happening through postage meters and through permit accounts and things like that, where you can see where this is happening to where you need to have these automated tools where you can get these savings. Even more exacerbated when you use first-class package service, which is that one that goes by the ounce that I was telling you about, where the savings from the retail rates, running it through your postage meters, to commercial is 24 to 41% less. Now, the same packaging you use for UPS ground that you buy at your Staples or your Express stores, you could use for your first-class parcels and get those same rates. So on documents, you could track documents for as little as $3, which is something that's unheard of in the private carriers. Certified. A lot of, financial institutions, banks, healthcare organizations have to send a lot of certified items to do things like policy cancellations, notices that you need proof that the person signed for something and got validated that they have it. So most people are filling out these green cards to prove that items got delivered. We recommend people move to electronic return receipts, which is, you can track them on a website to see which items have been delivered, and print out 8.5 by 11 sheets to prove the signatures. This upholds in most courts, is become the accepted ways for larger volume, customers who use certifieds, but it saves $1.20 a piece. Again, it comes to the position of needing the visibility of where this applies. So one thing that we're recommending for clients, and there's been huge advances in this, is considering multi-carrier web-based enterprise systems. And so all those calculations that we talked about, can be difficult to make through, the free carrier provided tools. If you have multi-carrier systems, they can show the rate structures across all your carriers and service levels, on a dashboard. So across, you can see, this is one system example that can show you your rates by day and by time of day across all your services. What are the rate structures? So people can make an informed decision. So at the same screen, someone can compare, a UPS overnight or UPS or FedEx overnight to a postal priority package or even a ground service. And so they can see those rates right next to each other. Those same systems can also do postage stamps, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute, so everything can be controlled in one place. So the beauty of these types of platforms is they have employee-level access, multi-carrier rate shopping, single sign-on, so they can manage all your users in one place. Instead of having to manage an employee database in your UPS system and your FedEx system and maybe in stamps.com or in other provided systems, you can have one database that ties into your corporate directory with controlling your user rights. So the second someone clicks on the icon to log in, you know exactly who's there, and you can log them in without even a password because it can log into their corporate password. At the same time, if they're no longer employed, it automatically kicks them out of the system. So this is a huge help for large organizations. At the same time, this has those USPS capabilities we talked about: commercial rates, electronic return receipt, and optional stamp printing. And this whole thing simplifies the visibility and oversight. So we're seeing a lot of companies moving towards these enterprise platforms due to the simplicity they create, and due to people having, those casual shippers, those uneducated shippers having better tools at their fingertips to make those better decisions. It makes it easier to implement those sort of, desired behaviors that you want when you can put it all on a simple tool for them to be able to use. So the question that you have to think about inside your organization, and this is a weird one, is why is it easier in many companies to send a $10 overnight than a 55-cent letter? And this is sort of counterintuitive, but you have to think about it for a second, especially in a diverse organization. So most organizations are going to use UPS Campus Ship or FedEx.com. These are free tools, okay? Versus, and there's usually a simple to use and defined process across the organization, at least to use one of these tools. With Postage, if you're using, there's multiple ways to do it. You could have a postage meter in your office. You might use PC Postage. You might have end users buying stamps. All users can ship from any location at any time if they're using FedEx or UPS. So whether they're at home offices, traveling, they can just log into the same website and then they can ship. With post offices, no defined process of how they have to do it. And they can do it from, usually the process is determined by what type of technology they have in that location. And that technology might be limiting. All charges are summarized by cost center and downloadable into Excel when you're using UPS or FedEx. With Postage is limited visibility, fragmented processes. People might be doing petty cash requests if they need to go to the post office to buy stamps. People might be putting it on their credit cards and filling out expense reports. So the reason I'm bringing this up is a lot of casual users may just say, I don't want to deal with going to the post office and buying a stamp and dealing with all that stuff, even though it's only 55 cents. I'm just going to send it out UPS or FedEx. So they're spending $10 on something they could have spent 55 cents. My point is, if there is multi-carrier tools in place that have the ability to generate stamps and control that expense in the same place, people can make better decisions for your organization and get things out at the lowest cost that it deserves, not at what's the most convenient for them. Because it becomes just as convenient to do it through the Postal Service, generating a stamp, as it is to generate a $10 UPS or FedEx. And that's not the case in most organizations today. So if you are considering multi-carrier systems, the question is, how do you onboard people? How does that happen? So these are the types of things that clients come to us for. Is, if you're going to onboard someone on a new, multi-carrier system, it might not even be a multi-carrier system. You might be using UPS today and you just signed a new contract with FedEx, so you have to change everybody from Campus Ship to FedEx.com. Someone has to manage that rollout. So whether that's IT issues, setting up systems with the client specifications, adding users, adding cost centers, ordering scales and label printers, sending first-time emails, running educational webinars, validating that the people have actually logged into the system and are using it, assisting with equipment returns, making sure people are turned off on old systems. Someone has to manage that process. And it's usually people in mailrooms or procurement who have to do that along with all their other responsibilities. So it's not always implemented as smoothly and flawlessly as companies might want. And the success of the onboarding program will determine the system's internal acceptance and optimization. So the question you have to ask is, do you have the right internal resources for whatever you're trying to do inside, any changes you want to make in your systems, whether it's these multi-carrier systems or through your carrier-provided systems, to manage them effectively? So how can we help? We can compile this data on a detailed dashboard. We can do detailed audits to show you, like upfront, with no commitment, where are your spends today? What are the core areas that you can reduce costs? We can manage the day-to-day requests, or in the self-service case management system, or be the first responders to your users, so there's someone to take care of it, with case numbers that we can be tracked throughout the entire process and reported on, which we feel is different than what most people are getting in the space today. We can work with all vendors, and we can build the level of visibility you need and maintain this data in our multi-location system on an ongoing basis. And to have these sort of, and the big thing is to have these sort of monthly data pulls and dashboards so we can see what the changes are over time. The hardest thing is you can get a report periodically from the vendor, but the key thing is to look for those changes that are happening over time so you can see what needs to be done to drive increased change. And all of this drives savings. So at the beginning of this, we talked about the core way to save money is to drive savings inside your existing agreements. It's not necessarily the negotiating the new agreements, it's the driving it within what you're doing today. And the hardest part about that in these fragmented organizations is coordinating that information throughout your users and making sure that there's a process to touch those users so they can do things differently. That's the process that we believe will make the biggest impact in most companies. We have a lot of experience in the enterprise space. We work with the largest organizations in the world. We have 2 accounts in the Fortune 10. The majority of our accounts are in the Fortune 1000. Ranges from anywhere from 20 locations, like I said, to multiple thousand, and it's across all industries. And frankly, the industry doesn't really make that much difference. Really what matters is that people have lots of locations and spend across multiple different carriers and, services that they're using. So I want to thank everybody for being on the call today. I want to open it up to any questions. Hopefully, if we gave you some ideas of things to think about with us or without us, that you could implement in your own organization. But the key point was that by having the right tools and resources around this, there is lots of savings that can be had out there. And hopefully some of these things open your eyes to some of these ideas. So I'm going to open it up to any questions and let me know how we can help. Doris, any questions that came up?
So just quickly, just a reminder in terms of how to ask a question. There's 2 ways. You can either click your hand and then I'll unmute you and then you can ask your question over the call, or you can actually type it in the chat and I will ask the question and we will do our best to answer all questions. One question is, are we going to get a copy of the presentation? There will be a copy of the presentation in the email follow-up after the webinar. You will also be able to find it under FAQs on our website. And yeah, next question was, some of these rates look different from my rates. Why is that?
So all the rates, the typical rates from UPS and FedEx are going to be the list price, which is that that's the core base table. And then some people are going to have discounts based on a couple different ways. It's either going to be a percentage discount off that rate table, and that could fluctuate based on a 52-week rolling average. So, that they give extra incentives based on how much volume you're giving them. So that's one of the most common ways. And the other way is a fixed rate, which is usually just a flat percentage discount off that table. So your discounts are going to be different than the list price. Obviously, pretty much everybody gets a discount. So it's just your discount percentages could vary over what we showed.
Okay, great. Hopefully that answers that. Do you have the ability to look after reporting for FedEx, UPS, and postage meters?
Yes, we would typically have a letter of authority that we would get from our accounts, and that would give us the rights to view their accounts and log into their portals and help pull their data. And from that, we go in on a regular basis and pull the needed data out so we can manage it in the ways we discussed. Other questions? And please feel free to email me afterwards if there's anything that you'd wanted to ask that you weren't comfortable in this group, adam.lewenberg@postaladvocate.com. We're happy to answer any questions after the fact. But I want to thank everybody for being on this call, and I hope this information was helpful. But regardless, there's definitely ways that everybody can reduce costs on their carrier and mail expenses. It's just by having the right tools and resources. So thank you very much for being on the call today.